Every single chess game has a turning point, a turning moment, and a key moment in the game. And this game was not short of that. A very fascinating and interesting game where, for the most part, we both held our nerve. And we held our nerve right until this moment in the game. And I want to obviously bring this game to you. You make a judgment call on what was the best move, what was not the best move, what either one of us could have done to influence the game. But the turning point is apparent. And it's a very interesting one. And I'm really happy to just review this game, have a look at the game together, and of course, share a few perspectives about what I think, you know, one should play in certain positions and so on and so forth. So, without any further ado, that is the intro for this video. So, let's have a look at the video and rather have a look at the game and let's see how everything transpired. So, I'm White Knight Shift and playing against my opponent, Clone King Buggy. Interesting name or avatar, word choice, so to speak. But anyway, let's continue with the game, which is what we're here to do. So, to kick things off, and if I could just get going here, and there we go. Awesome. So, starting off and kicking things off with the game. So, I play the normal move, which is a king's pawn, e4, and my opponent follows that up with the queen's pawn, which is d5. So, all is good, at least at the beginning. And so I capture their piece and they capture my piece in turn. So, of course, they now have their queen in the middle of the board. Now, nothing really interesting happening, of course, at this point. So I develop my knight. So at this point, I just develop my knight and they move back and I develop my bishop. And again, both of us trying to get some sort of control for the center because this happens to be the most critical part of the board, at least within the openings. So not really anything amazing happening here. It's just the normal Scandinavian defense, which is happening obviously on my opponent's side. And this is then followed by me just castling my side of the board. So they move their knight into the middle of the board, and I try to kick out the knights because I know for a fact that as soon as you have knights galloping on your side of the board, it's not really a good thing. And I said in my previous video that there's just this thing about knights, when they start galloping and they subliminally show up in places where you wouldn't expect them to be, and before you know it, you're forked and you can't really get out of that jam. So, with that said, they capture my knight. I typically do not like to capture the same value piece for the same value piece. In this case, it's their knight capturing my knight. That is fine. So, in exchange, I just capture their piece with my bishop. And they start to bring in their light squared bishop into the game, and that's fine. It does nothing at this point, and I also then activate my dark squared bishop with the idea of trying to capture this piece right over here. And with that, they castle. Now, at this point, obviously, those ideas go away. So we're now starting to transition into the middle of the game where we start to be a little bit more tactical and a little bit more deliberate in terms of what we're trying to do intentionally. And that's when I bring in my queen into action. And at this point, I'm probably thinking that there are going to be some loose pieces. For example, you've got this pawn which is not defended, and on my side, this really puts me into a jam because by moving my queen from the back rank, I am trying to bring it into action here. And just to try to get a bit more gameplay and really trying to take control of the board. And at this point, when I brought my queen here, I was really eyeing for this pawn, which was not protected. So my queen, or rather, they bring out their or put their bishop into the attacking line or the firing line of my bishop over here. Now, the one thing which I did not want to do is exchange if they do take my bishop with their bishop, I would not want to exchange using this pawn to recapture. So I took the first move by capturing their bishop, and they then retaliated, obviously, with the queen. So by moving this pawn, which is this pawn to c3, what I'm really essentially doing is I'm just trying to create this diagonal where all of these pawns are connected, and I do away with any sort of attacking coming from their side of the board, because again, it's way better when you've got your pawns connected in this fashion, and it really makes that nice strong pawn chain. And this is very crucial, especially towards the end of the game, and these things, as you will see, become very crucial. Now, another thing which I do want to mention just at this point is you'll notice that on my side of the board, I've got all my pawns here, and I've also got these three pawns here. And the one thing which I always make sure, or try to make sure at the beginning of my game, is perhaps being happy losing some of my mid pawns, which are the ones on the C, D, and E file. And that's fine, because then what it allows me to do is to bring out all my pieces, particularly my bishop and my knight, and I can start trading material just for those. But I always want to make sure that I've got pawns on the left side of the board and on the white. I would not want to be in a position where I've lost all my pawns on the left side of the board or all my pawns on the right side of the board, losing all of them at the same time, or left or right in totality. That would be a disaster. I would not want that. And you'll see why I always keep this at the back of my mind as I continue with my games. So, next move, they start to bring in their knights into action, and this is good. Of course, you don't want your pieces to be lingering and not doing anything, and having all of them combined and doing the attacks in one go. That's a really good thing. So I also bring my knight into play as well, essentially just making sure that I've got this block covered and this square covered rather. Now, what I like about my knight, in fact, what I like about the coordination of all my pieces, at least at this point, is the fact that I've got my free range bishop, and it's obviously got an eye on many, many squares. I also have my knight essentially securing a few squares as well, and this is important. And I've also got my queen, which is eyeing almost the whole board, or not essentially the whole board, but most squares. And this is good, and this is development which I think at this point I'm in a better position than black. And from here, I can actually start bulldozing and moving forward and attacking their pieces in a very critical and strategic manner, just because of my coordination of my pieces, at least at this point. But just this bishop, which is not defended, but that's fine. We'll sort that out. And again, they advance their knight, and I pull back. And at this point, I'm really happy with my position. So this I found very interesting, even though I'm not sure what it does at this point. But what I typically like about moving the pawns on the H file or A file is that it typically does away with knight advances. For example, if you have your knight, I mean, let's just say, for example, now that they've played this move, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to advance my knight here, and maybe let's say they play, this move, then I advance my knight over here. Obviously, this wouldn't really be a good move. I mean, you can even see from the bar on the left-hand side, it just had a stroke here, if I were to play such a move. But ideally, what I am saying is I typically like when I have a piece in front of my rook in this position, because what that then does is it stops all ideas of an advancing knight to this square, or this square, if obviously this piece was played, and so on and so forth. Because knights, again, they're just pieces you don't want within your side of the board, and if you can kick them out as soon as possible, try to do that so that you do not have them advancing on your side of the board and ultimately putting you in a very precarious position. So just to quickly go back, and so at this point they do advance their piece, and what I just want to do at this stage Let's just quickly do something here. And there we go. All right, cool. And so this is how things stand at the moment. And at this point, I'm thinking, I'm not really entirely now sure what the queens are doing within the match. So I just thought maybe a trade of queens would do the game more good than harm, because I'm really not seeing the queens doing anything tactical at this point. So I just offered a trade. So they did not obviously accept the trade there to begin, but I exchanged my queen for their queen. And this is what I liked. This is what I really liked. You see, at some point in the game, I did not want to exchange my bishops, or my bishop rather, for their bishop, which was on the light squared at some point here, as you'll recall in the game. And I didn't want to do that. And I had a queen right here on d3. And what I rather prefer to do is if they did capture my bishop, I would have captured their bishop in turn with my queen from d3 all the way to f3, as opposed to moving my pawn to recapture their bishop, which is exactly what they have done at this point. They have opened up this file, which is the b file. And this is not something that you really want to do. And again, the best thing which I think would have been great for them to do is, yes, perhaps try to exchange the queen, but not in this fashion, because exchanging the queen or allowing me to play this position, and what they did is as soon as they played this pawn to h6, I then played my queen to c4, and instead of realizing that if I take the queen, they open up themselves to many, many problems. I would have preferred, if I was them, to rather play a position where I can still capture, but it's not at the expense of exposing their king and opening up this whole file, which is what they did. I captured, they captured, and now I am going to do my level best to try and get to their king on this file. So from now on, moving forward, I think this was the first turning point of the game, the first moment where things are not looking good for black. And this is where I also start to smell a little bit of blood. And I'm like, you know what? I can actually win this game. So what do I do? Well, first of all, my rooks are connected, and as you will see, they were the key pivotal material in this game to winning this game. Now, at this point, they also got these double pawns, which is not a good idea. And like I say, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking I can win this game. So what do I do? First of all, I advance my knight. They bring in their bishop. And now you see that the bishops can, the bishops can see each other. I'm looking at their bishop, they're looking at my bishop. Now, at this point, I am comfortable, trading the bishops and even opening up this H file. I do not think that they really would have much of a gameplay because I still have my connected rooks over here, which is fine. So at the opening of the game, that is a very dangerous thing to do, which is just to expose your king to, this line over here and hope that you'll be able to salvage the game. For me, this is rather better to do, opening up your king like this in the middle towards the end of the game, where we've traded so many material that at this point it just makes sense to say, hey, now you just need to move forward, maybe trade and a few pieces as well, which is fine. So I was happy for them to either capture my bishop, and I would actually capture with this pawn, which is fine, or this one opening up the rook on this f file, which is also good. And I suppose that is exactly, what happened, but not from my side. I just quickly captured their bishop, and from then, they capture their bishop as well. So the king is now even more exposed than it was when they captured with this pawn rather from b7 rather to c6. So now the game is starting to open up just a bit more. And things, again, are not really looking ideal for the black side of board. And so at this point, I then bring back my knight, and for whatever reason, I had something in mind here, but for whatever reason, I just cannot recall what was the idea of bringing the knight back. But anyway, the match progresses. They take my knight and I take their knight, and I think perhaps maybe I just wanted to trade so that we have an end game of rooks and pawns. And again, I believe and think that my pawn structure is better than theirs at the moment. They've got this exposed pawn which I can just go for, and they obviously caught on that and they defended that. So I start to move my pawns forward, because one thing which you do want to have towards the end of the game is not have all your pawns, at the very beginning, none of them have moved. And at this point, they probably are in a better position. And let me just do this quickly. There we go. So I just wanted to have this a bar on the left hand side so we can see how each one of us is doing. And these are the pivotal moments in the game that I really wanted to get to. And hence I've brought back the bar here so you can see how things progress. Now, at one point, my bar was so good, you're not going to believe. So the match progresses. So I have advanced my pawn right over here, and I really want to have my pawns in the center of the board so that I'm closer to queening than they are on their side of the board. So they move their pawn forward, and I, instead of capturing this piece, I preferred to capture their pawn on my side with my rook. So I advance my rooks forward, and they have a much more active play within the middle of the game. So they take my piece and I exchange that by taking their pawn with my rook, and they advance their rook. I think this was a stupid, well, let me not say stupid, but I think this was a bad move, because now they've got this pawn which is not protected. But instead of taking this pawn, I decided to keep this e file closed. And what do? I just advance forward. And they also advance forward with their rook, and I move to the queen side of their board, because this is where I started seeing that this is ideally where the action should take place. So they obviously counter that by putting their rook in front of, or at the back of their pawn, just making sure that if I have any ideas, they're there to defend, but not a problem. So I advance my pawn, and at this stage, I'm advancing my pawn not because I had anything tactical about it, but again, like I said, at this point, you really want to move all your pawns forward, because you do not want to be in a position where you are so behind towards an endgame that you really have nothing as an advantage to queen using your pawn and obviously get the upper hand than them. So I suppose they caught on to the idea and they start to move their pawns forward. So this is good. This is now starting to build up a bit of tension, but it looks like I'm in a better position than they are, based on what the computer is seeing on the board. So I then start to bring my other rook into play. And of course, they've got this pawn right over here, which really has no protection whatsoever. And again, it looks like they have the same idea as I do. But by moving that pawn forward, they really were exposing themselves to a lot of trouble. So at this point, I then take their pawn. And this for me was the pivotal changing point in the game. Now, have a look at this bar on the left hand side. And from now on, you'll see that it will stay exactly as you see it for the majority of the game. Why? Because I had a better approach, I had a better structure, I had a better tactical position. So let's continue with the game. Now, this was very interesting because I think that they saw that they were in trouble. Soon enough, they're going to be hemorrhaging. And if they cannot salvage the game somehow, they're going to lose the match. But instead of exchanging the rooks on their terms, I decided to do this on my terms. And what do? I captured that exact piece which I wanted to capture initially a few moves ago, and they capture my piece and I put them on check. They have no choice but to move their king, and I don't care at what point or where they move their king, at which point. It doesn't matter for me which square they choose to move their king, because the idea is to now capitalize, there we go, on this rook. Now, they have a choice here. They can either move their rook out of the way, they really have this option, that option, or that option to move their rook. Otherwise, they either capture my rook or I capture their rook. There is no two sides about it. It's one or the other. Okay. Well, I mean, I do suppose two sides to it, but they really are out of options here. And as you can imagine, they take my rook and I take their rook. Now, before I took their rook, I had a decision which I had to make here. Do I take with this pawn or do I take with this pawn? Now, if I take with this pawn, then I am essentially exposing, or rather opening up, this file. And that then would mean that they could just, move all the way and possibly have an opportunity to capture all of my pawns here. And then they would have, this pawn just bulldoze all the way down to the end of my board and possibly queen. So the best move for me at this point is, well, let me take with this piece. And that is exactly what I did. Why? Because I want to make it difficult for the king to come all the way and start capturing all of my pawns right over here. So for them to do that, that would mean they would need to come this side, and then that side, and then that side, and then here, and all the way, versus coming all the way here, which is just in two moves. So I made it difficult for them because, once again, if I if I capture with this piece, then they essentially have only just two moves. One, two, and possibly let's just say three. And they probably would then start, capturing all my pieces here. And I did not want that. So instead, I made it difficult for them, by just making sure that I take with this pawn and just make it difficult for them and having to go all the way here so they can start capturing my piece. By the time they get to this piece right over here or this pawn on c3, they would have been down, by more material because of these exposed pawns and possibly also maybe just down by time. So, I mean, I had a very good endgame here, and the moment really started right over here, with the exchange of rooks. Okay, so I move here, they move here, I did that, exchanging the rooks on my terms. They did this, and then I did that, and this, and then that, and then this, and then and at this point, now I need to make a decision as to how do I want to finish things off at this point. So I took with the pawn and moved to c5, and this was good. I'm happy with my position at this stage, and I think I really have a good, tactical and winning position at this stage. And so I capture with the pawn, and from here they advance their king forward. And this is exactly what I want, for them to advance from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. And so I also start bringing my king into action. They bring their pawn. This is just a free pawn. Obviously, I'm not going to overlook that. They take my pawn. And what I start doing, as you can see, is I try to deviate their king away from these two pawns while I just go in and chomp all these pawns for free. So it worked. I push my pawn, they go after it. I push my pawn again and they capture that pawn. Now I can advance and also make my way to their pawns. And this is what I was referring to at the middle, or rather, at the beginning of the game, where I had pawns on the left side of the board and also on the right side of the board. And this is very important because as a king, you can't be in two places at the same time. You have to choose one. That's the only option you have. You have to choose one. And I knew that that towards the end of the game, they'll probably be left with a king, so will I, and we'll have a lot of pawns. Now, if they have pawns on just one side of the board, that means they have to bring the king all the way to that side of the board and start defending. Whereas on my side, I've got kings on, or rather pawns on both sides of the boards, and I can move whichever one I want. I can expose whichever one I want for capturing while I work my way up on one side of the board. And that's the option which you have, or those are the options which you will have if you've played your game strategically. Never, ever have pawns taken completely on either side of the board. At least have one or two, ideally three, on both sides of the board because they connect very well and they form this pawn trade or pawn a structure, a chain, which I demonstrated at the beginning of the match, and that's good. So I'm in a better position here. They move here, I move here, they move here, I take a piece, they come closer, I take more pieces, and I just munch all the pieces. So all they have to do now is try and defend this pawn, and that's not going to be easy at all. In fact, this is part of the game where a lot of people on chess.com just resign. Now, I find resigning very interesting when it comes to chess.com. A lot of people just resign as soon as they see that the game is lost and there really is no way to salvage the game. I have a game where I engineered a stalemate. So I'm going to give you a piece of advice here. Try not to resign in your games. Try not to abandon your games. If you can, engineer a stalemate. I tried that at one point and it worked. I was significantly down by material, but I engineered a stalemate. And I'll probably make a three-part series of how I did that. Maybe a two-part series. I don't know, part one, part two, or part one, part two, and part three. And I don't know. I'll probably get to that game in my next video. Maybe I should, just make that game in my next video as to how I engineered, a stalemate. And like I say, I think I was down material significantly. I only had about a pawn and obviously my king, and they had like two rooks, a bishop, and knight, and a couple of pawns. And I actually engineered a stalemate, and there was nothing that they could do. And they realized that, at some point in the game that, oh, they've actually walked me into a stalemate without them realizing. And yeah, and they got a point. I got a point in terms of elo, and that was it. So this individual, though, Clone King Buggy, did not resign, and I'm happy for that. But as me just giving my 2 cents here, try not to resign. And if you can, engineer a stalemate. It's not always easy, especially when the board is this clear, as you can see. But when the board still has a lot of material, it's easy to move into spaces and pockets where you find yourself in a position where you just cannot move, and it just becomes a stalemate. So try to engineer that. But in this case, it's not going to be the case because the board is just too clean for anyone to try and move into pockets where, they put the game on a stalemate. Anyway, moving forward, I'll probably have that video in my, or probably, make that video for my next upload here for YouTube. But anyway, at this point, I think this was a very good move, stopping any progress that they might want to make and essentially stopping their pawn. And obviously they can still, just come down, come all the way here, but that's fine. So, but anyway, from here, they do exactly that. And I also position myself to exchange pieces, and they come to the bottom, and I take this piece. So they take that piece, and at this point, I really don't care much about this piece, and I start just progressing my pawn on the c file, and they can take this piece. It's fine. I just progress, and can you take a guess as to which piece I brought back into the game? Well, for most of you, you like taking or bringing back the queen. In my case, I like the castle, especially when the board is this clear. I love checkmating individuals using my rook or my castle, okay? The rook is the piece that people like calling the castle. Well, it is a rook, and it is a castle as well. Most people prefer rook. I do too, but for some reason, I just said castle. Anyway, now they start to scramble, and obviously they would love to capture my rook, but definitely not going to happen. And they move forward, and I just put my rook away, and they try to gain ground. Not going to happen. And at this point, they had no choice but just to take the lingering pawn, and I then put my bishop on the b file. And that is how you actually checkmate with the rook and the king. You have to suffocate, in a way, your king and draw a line that they cannot cross. In this case, it's the b file, and they're going to stay on the a file. And as long as you have your king, you should be able to checkmate them. So they take the pawn, of course, so that's all they could do. And I progress my king next to theirs. Now, at this point, what has to happen is your kings have to align. They have to be on sort of like the same line. And in this case, it could be 3, 2, whatever, it does not matter. And they move down, you move your king closer to theirs, making sure that you keep your rook in a file that keeps them on one side. In this case, I've got my rook on the B file and they are on the A file. And at this point, they have no choice. They have to come back. And from here, all you do is you shift your rook to the left, and that is a checkmate. I remember being checkmated like this by a a schoolmate of mine, and this is many, many years back. I used to play chess in school during breaks, and we actually had like a chess room where we would go to the chess room and just play chess and have fun. And there was many of us that enjoyed our second break within school because I mean, like in school you've got breaks, first break and second break, and in the second break, which is typically longer than the first break, this is where we would use that time to go into a room. It was called the chess room, and we went there and we played. And I never thought, obviously at the time, that you could actually checkmate someone with a king and a rook. I thought at this point it just becomes a draw. Obviously, it wasn't the case, and I learned this move, and I just love checkmating my opponents with the rook and the king. It doesn't necessarily have to always be the king, or rather the queen, sorry. But the rook can just do just as a good job as any other piece, as long as you've got a king in the game. So that was the game, ladies and gentlemen. A few intense moments, and at some point I thought I'm not really doing well in terms of my positional play. And I do not think that my opponent either was feeling great about the game at some point in it. But, towards the end, I think my positions were better coordinated. And because of that, I was able to win their material and win the game. So, like I said, I'll probably have that game ready to upload for you guys so you can see how to engineer a stalemate and ideally in a way like draw the game as opposed to just resigning. A lot of people on chess.com just resign as soon as they see that the game is thrown and there's no way they can salvage the game, but you probably can if you can just maybe give it some thought and try to move your king in a position and blocks and squares and pockets that you have no other choice but to find yourself in a stalemate. So that is it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy the video, well, you know what to do. Become part of the community. If you like the video, well, there's actually a thumbs up button that you can press. And if you feel different about what I said about engineering a stalemate, let's have a conversation about it in the comment section. And with that said, thank you for joining, ladies and gentlemen. I will definitely catch you in the next one. Take care.